Lionel Sanders. Now, if you haven't heard of Lionel Sanders, he's a pro triathlete, Ironman, and he's been doing his thing now for a number of years and has a YouTube channel where I suppose he's created like a catalogue of all of the races he's done and the insights into his racing and training and his nutrition. And his latest video is quite interesting because he's concerned about his own health. So I think at the time of recording this video right now, it's the beginning of March, and he's just released this video about 6 days ago. And yeah, I think a number of people might, if you haven't heard of him before, you go and look at his latest video. It's called Breaking the Cycle of Bad Eating and Poor Sleep. It's about 13 minutes long, and it's interesting because he's worried that he's going to essentially die young from diabetes because of his first blood test he's had in his life. And as I say, I think he's about 38. So he's still young. So on this channel, if you've seen other videos, I like to created a lifestyle for myself based on diet. Whether you're exercising or you're sedentary, you don't do any exercise, diet is still the most important thing that will either lead to a long and healthy life, as far as you can tell, but at least every day being healthy. And he dives into, and he's done other videos, but I want to look and I suppose dissect what he's talking about, because I think he is, as he says, he's still learning, and I think he hasn't quite got there yet. And why am I making this video on this topic? Well, I think there's going to be a number of videos that are going to be made on this video, reacting to this video, that are not going to put out information, in my opinion, that is going to be healthy to follow. So there's a lot of misinformation or lies around the topic of diabetes, health and diabetes. And I think if you're someone who is not really interested in exercise, which, I mean, that's a great loss, you should be. Life is movement, isn't it? Movement. So that's for another video. But you probably look in from the outside and see, if you see footage of him in his videos, he's very lean, and you would say he's like the perfect embodiment, probably for a lot of people when they think what fitness looks like. Yeah, he's very lean and muscular, and he runs, cycles, swims, and he's very good, very strong, fit athlete from the outside. But as you can see in the video, his personal health on the inside that you might not see. So for example, his sleep, he complains it's very poor, and he's upset that his nutrition is poor as well. And for years he's been unhappy with his sleep and his diet for years. So I'm making this video because I've created, from my own experience, trying to be as fit and healthy as I can be. So hopefully you can see, at least from the video, my face is very lean. So I'm always lean every day, and I'm not pre-diabetic. I'm not diabetic, type 1 or type 2. And I don't have any of the hallmarks that would show, oh, well, you've got this symptom, so you're probably diabetic. And I eat the same things every day. I structure it so I think I structure it in a way that I think is normal, should be normal, so I don't count calories, I don't restrict calories, I don't count calories in versus calories out, and I don't have supposedly sugar crashes or sugar cravings, and yeah, my sleep is good, I eat the same things every day, and there'll be other videos on the channel, and I say this video could be 17 hours long, so I think I'll react to the video, just show you different bits and we can discuss it. And I say I'll also bring in just basic scientific knowledge and understanding that we have, that you could all learn, anyone watching this video, while I mention them or afterwards. You can go away and look them up and see, you know, stuff like insulin sensitivity is very important to understand how it works. And you need to also understand that there's a lot of interest in drugs, big pharma will affect your health and diabetes, because obviously there's no money in not people being on medication, is there? So if your diet leads to you needing to be on medication, then it's not a conspiracy to think that the way of eating leading to more drugs being prescribed, therefore, is, in my opinion, quite often what we see. So we'll just have a look what he has to say. I'll just play it on my phone here, and I think he starts off with blood test.
Test everything, seeing as I haven't really done any testing. I might as well make up for it now. For the most part, everything looks pretty good, healthy, decently.
I don't know about copyright and whatnot, but I'm just, you know, reacting to this, fair use and whatnot. So it just is a reaction so that we can improve our health together and learn from other people's misfortune. And then we can be in fortune, or find fortune.
Healthy. Otherwise, everything looked okay, except my A1C. I came up at 5.9, which is in the pre-diabetic range. I think 6.4, 6.5 is like the threshold to being diabetic. And so that was, you know, quite surprising and something serious, because diabetes is not a disease that you want to mess around with. And here we are making yet another video about this, but this time I'm actually starting to get, I probably could have got this feedback a while back had I went and actually tested myself, because I've been showing symptoms. I mean,
So A1C, again, this video will be very long. You can go and either look up now, pause the video, and just go and look up A1C and see what it is. But essentially, it's just a marker that if it's increased, then it's a sign that you're pre-diabetic or diabetic. So he's saying that it's elevated into a range that he thinks, or is being told, that shows that he's essentially going down the road of diabetes. Well, someone needs to tell him, or he hasn't been told, or for some reason, people might say, well, you need a nutritionist and whatnot. So we'll just take it easy, take it step by step. So if we look at studies, and we don't even need to, we just know if you're an athlete and you do test, you will find that your A1C will be elevated. Okay? And the reason for this is, if you're fueling with sugars, then obviously you're eating a lot of sugars, and especially Lionel, because he's exercising a lot, he wants to be the best he can be, then he says in the video as well, he's eating a lot of sugar. So the A1C will be increased. And we know this when we look at studies, and also people, if you're watching this video as well, and if you exercise and you're eating a lot of sugars while you're exercising, your A1C will be up. And the difference to make here, and this is it could be another video again in itself, if you exercise as much as Lionel is, or you're trying to be the best you can be, exercise the most you can in a week, 15, 20, 25 hours, let's say, on the bike, for example, as an endurance athlete, then you can't be compared to someone who doesn't do any exercise at all, because it's completely different. So if we say that most people, they don't exercise versus people who do exercise, it's a completely different ball game. So again, it's the same thing for heart rate. So if someone's heart rate, if they're unfit, inverted commas, is 60 or 70, for example, at rest, and an athlete is 30, for example, or 35, if their heart rate, if they feel unwell and they come in to hospital, A&E, or whatever it might be, so I'm here, living in the UK here, in America it'd be the emergency room or whatever, same thing, and an athlete is maybe 60 or 70, a doctor would see them and say, well, you look normal. But then you'd have to say, well, no, normally my resting heart rate is 30, 35, so more than double, something's wrong. And for the sedentary person who doesn't exercise and is unfit, if they come in and the heart rate is 60 or 70, then it would look the same, but it's not. So what I'm trying to get across is, if you are exercising a lot and fueling it with lots of sugars, so you're eating sucrose on the bike, table sugar, for example, fueling, and you're having at least 100 grams an hour, even if you do 1 hour, you're still having 100 grams an hour, at least, then your A1C will look increased. But everyone else, most people, they're not exercising. Generally, they have markers of being unfit. So it can't be compared to someone who's in the top 1% or even less fitness versus the 99% of most people. So I hope you understand that, what I'm trying to get at.
Since it would not be uncommon for me to pee 8 times in 8 hours of sleep, meaning I'm not sleeping. Because I'm the type of person who, like, when I go pee, I also wake up a bit, and then, like, we're talking.
So just even in that, you can structure your how you eat during the day in order to not need to urinate so many times during the night. Again, that's another video. But just there, he's showing, and there's other clips in the video, he's showing tea and coffee. And, these are, just for example, I don't know if he has a cup of tea or coffee or whatever before bed. But these sort of drinks, they're diuretics. So they will make you need to go to the bathroom, go to the toilet more often. If you were just having water, or if you just sprinkled in a little bit of sugar to make it some nice sweet sugar water. So there's one thing. And again, you can structure how you eat during the day so that you don't need to wake up, as he says, almost 8 times during an 8-hour sleep.
Like, little sleeps of 45 minutes times 8. And
he's a family man as well. So I would say, 8 hours, really, if you're doing everything you can to be as fit as you can, 8 hours, you're probably wanting to look more like to 10 hours. Or if we say you go to bed at 8, for example, if you wake up, so when you go to bed, so if you say you go at 7, 10 hours from now would be fine. So even if that means you're waking up in the early hours of the morning the next day, as long as you've still had at least like 10 hours, really 10 to 12 is probably good. But yeah, you know, if you want to be elite in being the best you can at getting the most out of your body, then 8 hours probably isn't quite enough. And yeah, so
candy,
another video that,
you know, sugar in the middle of the night, having intense cravings.
Again, I say there's so much to break down on this, and people who don't exercise a lot, I say Lionel is elite, isn't he? He's elite. People who are looking in, they see this amazingly sculpted body, and he's fit, and he runs really fast, cycles fast, swims fast. And people look in and they say, well, I get sugar cravings and I'm not elite and I'm getting the same things. Well, again, if you structure the diet through the day, like I've done, you don't get these cravings if you're eating an adequate enough amount of the fuel that the body needs. So here's the first term, scientific term, glycolysis. Okay, so glycolysis is the primary energy system of the human body, and when you eat food, the reason you're eating food primarily is to raise your blood sugar levels. So we're talking about glucose as the primary energy source that requires insulin. Insulin binds at the receptor site and allows glucose into the cell. As I've done other videos, and I'll keep the same message, because as you can see, even at the top level, the top of the top level, mistakes are still being made. And I think Lionel's in a good position to spread information on social media that is beneficial and not detrimental to health. Okay, so we're thinking about glycolysis, especially as an athlete. We want to fuel glycolysis, and we want to get our primary energy system, so our energy from sugar, so glucose derived ATP. Okay, so I could keep going on, and there's a deep dive and a bit for another video, but that's the first thing you need to know about is glycolysis. Okay, so that's the primary energy system. So if you're eating enough throughout the day from breakfast, and you've eaten enough, then you won't get these cravings in the middle of the night, which personally for me, I've never had it, so it sounds ridiculous to me that someone would have this, regardless if they're a professional athlete or not. It's just something that I don't have, because the diet that I've structured, which, just a quick insight, essentially is 3 main staples during the day of rice for breakfast, lunch and tea with a tomato sauce. So at the moment I'm about 64 kilos at 5'11". I think Lionel Sanders in a previous video said he was about 70 kilos lean, or 69, 70, something like that. I can't remember how tall he is. So when you see videos of him, he does carry quite a lot of muscle mass. So you could say that would be also a thing that you could look to reduce, but we'll get onto that. So I have the rice with a tomato sauce, spicy, nice hot spicy tomato sauce, and I have that with fruit. And then between the main meals, so this is a day if I'm not exercising, for example, supplement that with fruit, or as he would call it, candy. He mentions it in the video. So I'd say gummy sweets, so those soft gummy sweets. I have that during the day, and then, so that would be from maybe 8 in the morning through till about 5 or 6. And then if I want any more, maybe at 6, for example, 6 p.m, I would have bread and jam, toasted bread and jam. I'd have maybe some rice cakes and jam. I would have, and I can swap out maybe the third meal. Instead of having rice, I'd have a big bowl of pasta, and I have stuff like rice. So again, in the evening after the last meal, stuff like rice pops, or cornflakes cereal like that with oat milk, and I'd be having for each meal 400 to 500 grams of cooked white rice, for example, on average. When I'm exercising, more, and again for pasta, 400 to 500 grams. And he talks about preparing food and how it's lazy eating. So we'll get onto that as well. So it's not complicated what I've just mentioned, is it? And it's not difficult to prepare, and it's not expensive. So there's so many things to unpack.
Sleeping just absolutely horrible when I do sleep, and this is what I've existed in now for, well, I've slept horrible the entirety of Aaron and I's relationship, and we began seeing each other in 2011. So I'm at like 14 straight years.
Imagine that, 14 years of poor sleep and not being able to work out or maybe knowing what's happening. So he's trying to be the best he can, and he's got this like iron weight pulling him down of poor sleep. And if you don't have good sleep, I say at least 8, but really, if you want to be the best, 10 to 12 hours, then it doesn't matter how good your training is, then you'll suffer.
But last time I ate even decently well for any continuous period of time really was beyond my memory at this stage.
That's
20
interesting.
years ago, probably.
20 years.
But I mean, in my defense, I guess, it is sort of the way of the Western world. Convenience food, processed food, not very nutritionally dense food, calorically high, macro high, salt, fat, sugar high, nutritionally fairly devoid food. So anyways, I'm fully immersed in the culture for sure, and I am as lazy as they get with regards to eating.
Lazy. So I hear that so often, and it's something again that aspiring athletes and people who have nothing to do with exercise but still maybe have a little bit of thought to health say the same thing, and I hear it every time, and it's again ridiculous to me because it's not difficult to eat well. And I say this is why this video is interesting, because he's talking about how he understands that he has been indoctrinated into a certain way of eating that he knows is detrimental to his health, but still continues. And yeah, you could look at this as a psychologist as well. There's so many different ways to look at this.
It's all related. My laziness is related to the way that I have been training, and my lack of, let's say, keeping training in a positive, absorbable manner.
So even there, as you see, he's done an hour, and he says easy, 260 watts. So he's still very fit, because for most people 260 watts for an hour is something that most people would probably never even do. So you can see that he's still very fit, and the proof is in the power that he's doing.
Anyhow.
And again, he's mentioned here calories as well. He's still thinking in terms of calories, which it doesn't make sense. Again, there's so much to unpack in this video. If we look at just, for example, sugar, 1 gram of sugar versus 1 gram of fat, and you say, well, a calorie is not created equal, is it? Because 1 gram of sugar is 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat is 8 calories. It's actually a little bit more, it's almost 9, but just for easy mathematics, we'll do 4 versus 8. So for the same amount of weight, you're getting twice the amount of calories. So you would say, in terms of literally what you're taking in to make you feel full, 400 grams of sugar versus 400 grams of fat, for example, you're getting twice as amount of calories for the same weight of food that's literally going inside you. And when we talk about actual food rather than the individual macronutrients, so the macronutrients being carbohydrates, fat, protein, fiber, and water, and these 3 carbohydrates, fat, and protein, the ones that we talk about that manipulate our weight when we eat them in the ratio that we think of, these are the ones that affect weight. And obviously you want to drink lots of water, that's always good, and fiber in the foods that I've already mentioned. But if we talk about, for example, a gram of rice or a gram of potatoes, for example, these foods, there's less than there's like 0. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but it's like 0.01% of a calorie in 1 gram of potatoes, for example. So there you go.
Then I put on the continuous glucose monitor, and it was accurate. The A1C was accurate. I wore the continuous glucose monitor for 10 days, and even after making some dietary changes to eat to control blood sugar, meaning lower glycemic foods, my 24-hour glucose average for the first few days was like 123 nanograms per.
So as you can see, he's very lean. He's got a lean body. You can see all the
deciliter, as I believe
you can see the definition of his muscle as well, which suggests that he's also, and he talks about a lot, he does eat lots of carbohydrate, which does give you the effect of having more visible muscles, rounder muscles, because when you're storing glucose, when you're eating, and you're laying it down as glycogen, you hope so for every 1 gram of glycogen, it's 3 grams of water. So when your glycogen stores are full, you're also full of water weight with that. So it gives you the effect of having nicer, rounder, toned muscle, which you get also from exercising as well. So that's why he looks good the way he is, because he's obviously still getting the amount of carbohydrate that he needs to.
Terminology, which is almost exactly in line with that A1C value of 5.9. So
he's still worried about the A1C. And these glucose monitors, they came from type 1 diabetics who, they would always be the first pioneers of these continuous monitors, because obviously they need to monitor their glucose levels. So a lot of people over the last 30-ish years, they have people who are type 1, they have insight into the effects of what different foods have on their blood sugar levels, and now everyone seems to be using them, and it's sort of finally come across that people can track it with these monitors. But the only thing I would say is, again, with athletes, they're comparing themselves to the rest of the wider population. So when they're seeing elevated levels versus people who are type 1, and we have now a range that we know is healthy to be in for people who are just, ordinary, who don't want to be, or, they just aren't chasing that goal of being as fit as they can. He's comparing himself, and presumably the doctors and whoever is comparing him to other people who are not in the same lifestyle, so that then it's not comparable. And as I say, I've already mentioned, studies show it's not something to be worried about if you are a pro or training to be a pro athlete, endurance athlete.
Totally accurate. So I have been floating around. My blood's been floating around 24 average in the 120 range for who knows how long.
Again,
because I was
good.
tested.
It's lean, isn't it?
Maybe 5-6 years. Who knows? Like, that's how long I've had these symptoms for.
So, and then you're sharing, foods that we know are detrimental to health. So eggs here, fatty eggs.
In my memory.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
My eating a bit. I have to do this because, I have to eat a lot of carbs because I burn a ton of carbs. But I did start thinking about it a little bit deeper and started to, realize that 8 grams of carbs.
I'll just skip it here a little bit forward.
The carbs after and then I also, the way that I eat or was eating prior to understanding a bit more is probably the absolute opposite way to.
So he's saying that he thinks he understands a bit more now. And I say he's got, if you go back and look at his videos, he's been doing it for years. So there's a catalogue of videos that he's made on his nutrition and his training. So you can go back and look at them as well.
One should eat. And that would be very little for breakfast, a little bit for lunch, and then a shit ton for dinner. And because I ate very little for those first 2 meals, I would also prioritize a massive amount of carbs. And as the day goes on, insulin sensitivity, and I saw this in my data, insulin sensitivity goes down.
So obviously, if you want your insulin to work as effectively as possible, you want insulin sensitivity to be up, always up. I think it's very important to understand insulin sensitivity and understand also the basis of insulin sensitivity, where it came from, what everyone uses it now. Seemingly everyone uses the term insulin sensitivity, but without mentioning that the pioneer who, the scientist that coined the term that we all now use, insulin sensitivity, Harold Hemsworth. We're going back to 1920s. I think it's been 100 years now, something like that. Or we've known about insulin sensitivity for a long time. It's a bit of a cut here because my camera stopped recording for whatever reason. So I did the whole thing, kept talking to the camera, and nothing was recorded. So I'll try and remember where I was up to and not repeat something that I've already said, but not forget something that I said, because I thought it was quite a good take. It would have been a whole take. Anyway, so I got my glasses on now, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me better. So I think I was talking about insulin sensitivity. So it was 1936 paper was Harold Hemsworth released, and a paper he released in 1936, and he says insulin sensitivity, and says if you want to increase it, look to have a diet based on carbohydrates, low in fat and low in protein. And I've already mentioned the foods that I eat are naturally low in fat, and they have the amount of protein that you need in order to be lean. And I'll talk about how fat and protein can be manipulated in order to gain weight or lose weight, depending on how much the ratio is. So if you have high fat, high protein, obviously you're going to manipulate your body to increase weight because of anabolics, and less fat, less protein, less anabolic body, lower fasting insulin levels, therefore less anabolic, so it's more. So we'll get onto that in a minute.
And I would snack all night on, for the most part, candy. And
so as he's mentioned here, so he was eating more during the day, and then he was snacking at night. So it sounds ridiculous, because to me, I worked out I tested it myself. I work out what works so that I don't have to do what I think is not normal. So eating three meals of the day plus the snacks during the day, and I don't know if I've already mentioned the first day, but breakfast, lunch and tea, essentially routine done by 6 p.m. I would say. And then any snacks you can have the last thing. I say it's for me, used to have cornflakes, prefer now the rice pot with oat milk as the last thing to eat, and I've eaten all of the carbohydrates that I've needed throughout the day to that point, and not have these cravings that people talk about.
I would also, in the middle of the night, I would have Nature Valley bars, and I would eat 1 or 2 every night, which each of those has a whole bunch of shit in it. So then I started to realize, well, there are some things that I could do differently, and let's see what the results of that.
And again, I think that's like a fatty. There's cheese and crackers, so it's fatty processed foods. So you want to avoid that.
I started having, for instance, overnight oats and putting a ton of calories on that, and trying to make breakfast a big meal.
So he's talking about oats there. So personally, I would avoid oats because, from my personal experience, I found that oats digest so heavily on the digestive system. So when I would have oatmeal for breakfast and porridge for breakfast, even after 2 or 3 hours of letting it digest, I would find that it would be really uncomfortable when I was exercising, so riding a bike, doing long rides, getting fit. My legs would be blocked. I'd get pain in my stomach, in my intestines, because it was especially as well if you're doing really hard riding. Essentially, your digestive system is like shutting down, in inverted commas. So you're not able to digest as well as you would if you were just sitting and relaxed. So it's not a food that I recommend. And in its place, I would stick to, again, white rice for breakfast. So for me, 400 to 500 grams of white rice with a tomato sauce, because it's unbelievable how good white rice digests before you go out and you do your training. It's unbelievable. It's so good compared to all these other foods. So in this case, oats.
And then started to change.
To try it. White rice, not oats.
My eating
later.
patterns during exercise, and my mantra being the more power, the more carbs.
That's true.
The less power, the less carbs.
True.
And that's throughout the day, really. And so, if you remember, there were days...
We already mentioned glycolysis, I think. Yes. Glycolysis. Think glycolysis.
Where I would consume 1,000 grams.
And again, there's a bar there, keto friendly, 0 added sugar. Well, whenever we hear this recommended of ketosis, ketones, so ketosis, this is a medical term used to describe ill health in someone. So we're talking about getting energy from sugar, fat and protein. If you're cutting the sugar, you're obviously going keto, and you're getting energy source from fat and protein. So when someone is admitted in a hospital, the emergency department or whatever, and they're unwell, and then they see they're in ketosis, it's because it's a medical term for being unwell. Okay, so if you want to perform the best, as he said, carbs equals power, and that's just for the rest of life as well, not even exercising. You want to perform the best in your life, then you need to fuel the primary energy system of the human body, which is glycolysis, glucose-derived ATP, not sugar being made from gluconeogenesis and the other forms from fat and protein, because they lead to worse performance. Okay.
Of carbs a day.
Just think what happens when you get the bonk, when you're doing your exercise and you're out of energy, you're out of sugar. Okay, so imagine living like that every day. What's the point? Life is sweet. Okay, the good life is the sweet life, not the ketogenic life.
A long day, I would consume over 2 pounds of sugar in one day.
Good.
So I would
good.
consume
For exercising. Good.
I don't know, 500-600 grams in workout, and then another 500-600 grams after workout. And those days weren't even that. Those were like aerobic days. They wasn't really burning.
So I always recommend, no matter how much, whatever it is your target is in that training day, whether it's an hour or 5 hours or however many hours, always at least 100 grams an hour, and then you will never bonk, never cramp. And there's another thing, cramp. You know, it's not about salt, okay? It's about the amount of sugar. And you might say it's ridiculous, but if you always have at least 100 grams of sugar in your bottles an hour, and you at least trained, you don't overtrain and overreach, overtrain, overreach. You know, you do too much too soon, then yeah, you get cramp. But it's 100 grams of sugar an hour. You can test it yourself. You will never cramp. And obviously water, you know, you need to have lots of water, but it's not about salt. Even if you still put salt in your nutrition or your water bottle or whatever, you'll still cramp. It'll still might just happen, okay?
That many carbs because the intensity wasn't super high. And then eat a bunch of candy too on top of that. And so that's some of the big things that I implemented. And then by the end of the first 10-day period with the continuous glucose monitor,
beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful waist training.
I was able to get my blood sugar average for the 7 days down
America,
to the low 100s, which still would be considered to be not normal. It's still
What's normal
above,
again?
let's say, the normal range that you should be in, because, you know, I think you should be spending, well, the entire night under 100 for
So he's talking about normal. And I think I've already mentioned in the video, so just coming back and doing the second take. But normal is, you know, the 99.9% of most people versus the 0.1 or 1% of people who are exercising at an elite level. And people coming and looking from the outside, thinking that it shows that even, look, you know, sugar, it causes, he's talking about, you know, the main point is that he doesn't want to die of diabetes. Well, I've already mentioned A1C and, you know, your fasting sugar levels. These are high because he's eating a lot of sugar, but because he wants to be the best Ironman triathlete in the world. He wants to be the best, one of the fittest, strongest endurance athletes on the planet, and potentially, you know, one of the fittest people that's ever lived. So as a result of that, you can't compare to normal, because normal is not something that he is. And if you exercise a lot, endurance sports, cycling, running, he's doing swimming as well, you can't compare yourself to the normal, which might be if you're coming in from the outside, looking in from the outside, and you don't exercise, and you are comparing yourself to an elite athlete. It's not comparable. You know, so I think I've already mentioned about heart rate. You know, if you're 30 versus 60 and is an endurance athlete, but then at 60 versus 90 and you come into hospital and they look at your heart rate and it's 60, but for you that's twice. You'd say, well, that's not normal, but for a normal person 60 is maybe normal. So you can't compare and get worried, because you can't compare it. It's not the same.
And then also for most people, between meals,
most people,
be, you know, a little while after
it's not
a meal,
most
you
people.
should be under 100 nanograms per deciliter, and thus your average is likely going to be under 100 for the whole day. But I don't know if that's feasible for an ultra endurance athlete, because we train so frequently and we're also eating so frequently, and we have to eat a ton of carbs.
Exactly.
So I was quite happy with how much I was able to elicit change, and that basically, as I've followed this pathway now, and this has been going on, I had that blood test done in November, and so then I began this process basically mid-November, late November.
Very beautiful.
Early December. So now we're knocking on the door of like 2 months of behavioral change. And as I've slowly learned more and kind of figured out, don't go so super polarized in one direction, but certainly moving more towards thinking about not eating super processed carbs and stuff. Definitely still eating a shit ton of carbs, but eating a lot of it with fats and proteins and their more of natural source.
So he's talking about fats and proteins there now, and processed foods. So I've already mentioned there's so much to break down from the video, but there's a misconception about processed foods. processed foods being unhealthy, just they are all healthy, and then foods that just produce, if you're American, produce that's healthy, and there's just this distinct divide, and everything's processed is bad, and then he's talking about fats and proteins there being in normal levels. So taking the fat and the protein one, even if you get your fat, for example, from, let's say if you're a raw vegan, and you say, well, you get your fats from your nuts and avocados or whatnot, you're still getting fat. So if you're eating lots of fatty nuts and avocados, just for example, and these fatty natural foods, then you'll gain weight from the fat from those foods, just as you would from the processed foods. So yeah, you've got your natural fats like your omegas and whatnot in these, but the body puts it down very effectively, efficiently. So essentially, you basically, you get 100 grams of fat from nuts and avocados. You're basically putting down 100 grams of fat on your body, just like if it was from a processed chips or processed pizzas and these foods and sweets that have lots of fat in them, like donuts. You can work out from if it's rapeseed oil or sunflower oil, or if it's from animal fat off the back of a dead animal. It's still fat. So if you're having 100 grams of fat from that, you're still laying it down as fat. So you'll still get fat. And the protein that you get from your food, like I've already mentioned with what I eat, if you're looking to lose weight, I mean, that's another topic, but lose weight, then less protein, and it affects your insulin in terms of increasing insulin resistance, and therefore lowering insulin sensitivity. Okay, so you want to look for, I'll show you now what ratio of carbohydrate to protein to fat you want.
In a super highly processed source, I've literally felt my whole life.
So again, processed foods, I eat processed foods. So I eat bread, for example, in the evenings, and I have stuff like cornflakes or rice pops, stuff like that in the evening, and gummy sweets, they're processed foods, and white rice is processed foods. And even having a can of mango, for example, I have canned mango a lot, that is processed, isn't it? And even if you make up a smoothie of fruit, that's processed, but it's not unhealthy. And it's the distinction between those things that are unhealthy and that are healthy. And we'll get onto that in a moment.
Whole reality begin to change, because I felt something that I can't remember the last time I felt, which was I was just walking around about to begin a bike, and I felt good. And last night I peed 2 times. The night before I peed 1 time in the middle of the night.
And again, the way you eat does affect the way you structure your day in order to make you not urinate late at night. So obviously, like for me, for example, if I did my training later in the day for whatever reason and I need to get back, and I was eating later than I normally would, eating and drinking, in that time it would then make me need to go to the bathroom later in the night. So there's ways of behaving that you can't just blame something on that you think is causing it. So I think I've already shown that he had diuretic, drinks, tea and coffee, for example. So he said you'll have lots later in the day, for example. So I would need to go to the toilet, a few times after I would have, eaten and drunk, and when I've balanced, from when I come in from a training, let's say if I did 5 hours or 100 miles, for example. I don't want to be going to bed like an hour or 2 hours after that. I want a good amount of time in order to digest and get the liquids back in to me, and then they'll, my body will become back to the optimal range, and I won't need to urinate multiple times during the night, and I don't. And from the way I eat, I don't. Maybe once, quite often, not at all.
And I've been sleeping soundly. People have been saying you eat like a bag of shit for a long time, but it's just like anybody, you know, a smoker or something who they know they're smoking and it's going to give them lung cancer.
Talking about cancer there.
I don't know why, you just keep smoking.
So before he then shows what he's doing now, I'll talk about how you need to understand the importance of what the ratio is to be healthy, okay, between carbohydrates, fat and protein. So the ratio, in order to increase your insulin sensitivity, as he was talking about, so insulin sensitivity increased, the ratio of fat, carbohydrate and protein, so they go, that's more, that's less. So not much fat, lots of carbohydrates and sugars, and protein less, that you keep the protein down. And this ratio, it's not to scale, but essentially fat low, protein, you don't need to worry about how much you get if you're eating a diet based on the staples of rice, fruit and sugar. And this leads to increased insulin sensitivity. And we know this because we have a body of evidence showing how this ratio of the three macronutrients, we've obviously got water and fiber, but we're talking about these ones essentially. These are the essential ones we're talking about, insulin sensitivity. So increased insulin sensitivity leads to lower fasting levels of insulin. When we talk about spikes and fasting levels, this is what we're talking about. And insulin is very anabolic. It's more anabolic than testosterone. And therefore, if you want to decrease your weight, for example, you want to eat in this ratio. And in the studies, when they do studies looking at diabetes, the control group to induce pre-diabetes is to put the group on a high-fat, high-protein diet in order to induce. If they put on a high-carbohydrate diet, this is the group that always comes out as being more insulin sensitive. There's higher insulin sensitivity levels. But that's how we know, because we test and we still see it. It's the same.
Until it's an addiction. I mean, it's an addiction. I live in a society where ultra processed foods is like, it's the norm. It's, I would, my joke is.
So showing that this processed food, and he's saying it's an addiction. Well, to understand what actually he means by addiction when he says his body's telling him, we have to understand, there's another thing, there's so many topics in this video to break down, but we're talking about in this, mentioning the addiction, that's the microbiome. So the foods that he's eating, these processed foods, because he's been eating them for years, so long, he has strains of bacteria in his gut now. So when I mention the microbiome, it's bacteria, and there's more. And why is it so important? Well, by weight of DNA, there's more DNA, bacterial DNA, in and on the human body than there is human DNA. So yeah, it's scary, that, isn't it? But the bacteria that live in the gut, they have this relationship with us, as in they help to break down the foods to help digest and take in the nutrients that we need. And if you eat certain strains of food, certain strains of bacteria will become more prevalent. And for them, and the way that they live, they can affect the foods that you want to eat. So if they survive on a certain food, and you get, in inverted commas, the nutrients from those strains, well, you know, the gut biome works in tandem with your body to live, then obviously you're going to want to have those certain foods because that's the biome that you created. But if you want to make the healthy biome, it'll take a few weeks or months, and you will notice of it after eating. So like I keep recommending, white rice, fruit and sugar, as well as, you know, other foods like, you know, pasta, but these foods high in carbohydrates and fiber, low in fat, low in protein. Once you've been eating like that for a few weeks, it gets easier, and in a few months, because the bacteria, the makeup of the bacteria in the biome changes, and you can change it, and you can become more healthy because of it.
Been for a long time now. I'm cooking tonight, and I pull out my phone and I say, so what do we want? Jersey Mike's, mod pizza, what do we want? You know, like.
Again, it says pizza. You don't have to have a hard, difficult to make pizza that's highly processed. You can make your own at home. Excuse me. And it can be very simple. You know, just a bread base, tomato sauce, and the things you can control the foods that you want to eat, and it doesn't need to be about laziness.
That's my idea of cooking. And so that's the next phase of my...
We're talking again about processed foods, the hot dog, and he's showing, if you notice, these foods, they're meat. So it's animals been murdered, and we take their body parts, and the hot dog is meat from animal agriculture is the most processed foods that you can eat. And the hot dog especially, you don't really know exactly what's in it when you eat it, but it's essentially the offcuts of all these other bits of animal that didn't want to be eaten, you know, minced up and squeezed into these things called hot dogs, and you call it food. I don't think there is anything more unhealthy, really, and this is stock footage that he's showing.
Is realizing that I've created this shitty eating culture here in this house. But I've created a culture of laziness, of lazy eating, which involves ordering shitty food,
Say ordering food, in the time it takes to order it, I presume it's coming to their house. You can make something very easily, like you just make up some rice. You know, you can make up it in a big batch, so you can have it every few, you know, a batch that will last you days at a time, with a sauce, and there's a staple meal right there, and it's not difficult, and it has all of the things in, because white rice is a staple of almost half the world's population right now, almost 4 billion people right now today. And quite often when we look at these populations, I don't know, I've already mentioned it in the video, rural China, Africa, these places, they're lean because they're not malnourished, they're just lean, and even if they don't exercise, they all look very lean and healthy, and they're not all diabetic or riddled with heart disease or cancer. Whereas he's just said these processed foods, he's worried because of these the Western style processed foods, okay? And he's shown already in his video lots of meat, hasn't he? So he's already shown in the stock footage, when he's talking about what he thinks is bad, he's showing meats.
And snacking on, you know, peanut butter cups all day. And so the next step on this journey now is creating a new culture.
And again, snacking on peanut butter. I've already mentioned the primary energy source is glycolysis. So you could swap out those, you know, peanut butter cups that he's mentioning, for example. And he wants to be lean, doesn't he? So you can swap it out during the 3 meals of a staple of rice with the fruit. In between, you have soft gummy sweets, and that's what I might have during the day as my go-to if I feel like it, after maybe I've had fruit. So it's easy to make it better.
First, of course, understanding what I've been doing.
And the soft gummy sweets, the vegan soft gummy sweets, full of sugar.
Myself, which is eating ultra-processed foods that are nutrient devoid. And that's where my tastes are. That's what I crave. I'll crave McDonald's and all these very processed things, and I'll crave the peanut butter cups and stuff because, of course, my body, I've trained itself to fuel itself on that.
See, I've already mentioned he's trained himself to fuel on that, and he craves it because I've already mentioned it's the connection with where you're absorbing this energy to live, the carbohydrate, as your main fuel source, glycolysis. It's the relationship between the gut and your brain, and these coming through your nervous system, this connection, and your brain interprets this and puts it together, and in the consciousness that you have, you then take that as, well, I need to eat that because this is what the biome, essentially, through the signals it's sending, is telling you that's what you need to eat. But as I say, you can change it. And you can change it to the foods that we should be eating. And we know, because when we look at population studies, the rice diet, it's not associated with cancers, heart disease, diabetes. Say almost half the world's population lives on a staple of rice at the center of their dish, surrounded by other things like fruit.
And so starting to change the culture from that standpoint, which for me means going to the farmer's market. That's a thing that I want.
And this is a very westernized view of the world Lionel has, and I think a lot of people have who will be watching this video, very Western style, thinking, well, this is the way to eat, and not understanding how we should eat because of big business, the fast food business, and its link with big pharma, and how essentially our ill health is funding big pharma. And it's sad, and I don't think it's just my opinion, because if we look, so many people are unhealthy, on drugs, generation after generation, but it's not working, is it? People aren't getting healthier once they then get onto the lifestyle of being fueled by big pharma drug routine of several hundred drugs a day. It's not working, is it? You don't get healthier. It's just then a routine of pills and drugs.
Going to the grocery store, looking around the grocery store, looking at what I'm eating actually, is this actually a food, or is this a...
That's not food.
Food-like substance. And then...
Yeah, so he's just shown a few minutes earlier, again, it's a confused, isn't it? He's just shown in the stock footage pictures of like meat, bits of meat and whatnot, being like, this is the bad stuff. And then he's showing meat, and now he's showing that it's good because he's cooking it himself. So it's better now for some reason. But we know that animal products, the chemicals that go in them to prepare them, the chemicals that went into the animals when they were alive, red meat, we know that it's a carcinogen. And you can just look on the NHS website, which there's nothing more mainstream than the NHS. Wherever you are in the world, if you look it up, that's the mainstream. So if that's what it says you should do, there's no more, you can't argue with, well, you're a conspiracy theorist or whatnot. if it's the NHS is saying it, it's mainstream, isn't it? So red meat, it's a carcinogen. And we know from all of these different chemicals that are in these animal products, they're carcinogens. So it's not particularly, in my opinion, a very good idea to show potential carcinogen there as an upgrade to health when he's just shown all these other meats
just
and animal
cultivating
products.
a culture of spending more time and energy on these things because it's holistic.
And just think, if you want the best digestion as well, as an athlete, you've got this steak sitting inside you for days digesting. If you're eating bits of animals of steak, call it steak, it's the backside of some animal, and you put forcing that down you day after day, you've got the steak just sitting in your stomach, just rotting essentially, because it takes so long to digest these very heavily protein, very protein rich animal parts, just like human beings. They're made of protein and fat. A steak is not a steak, it's a bit of an animal, and the animal has protein in it. Okay.
Not spend time and energy on these things, very likely because
and it's cooking it in fats there, and I say how it affects insulin sensitivity, and he's talking about how he's worried about being diabetic. And I've already stated that increased fat levels lead to lower, and he's worried about all these markers of diabetes and showing you exactly what you eat in order to cause the concern. And we know this. This is all stuff we know from research. You keep confirming it, but yet we say the opposite in mainstream for some reason.
Not recovering properly, and therefore I'm lazy and I eat like shit, which adds to me being tired and not recovering properly, and it's just this snowball, cyclical thing. Then that's what I have to.
And again, if you're eating stuff like that, it takes so long to digest, and if you're looking for, maybe you think, well, I need to get the protein that I need. Well, again, rice, it digests so well, and plants, they all have, if you're looking to have a staple plant, so not just eating kale, I'm talking about actual food that sustains you as a staple, so rice or pasta or potatoes and beans, they all have the protein in, all 20 amino acids. And because they digest so well, especially rice, I keep saying, it's just, boom, it's digested. Boom, you digest it and you're absorbing these amino acids. So it makes sense to eat the foods that digest well, doesn't it? In order to recover.
Because that's the culture that I want to create, because I don't want to die young of diabetes. And I'm headed down that pathway right now. And so that's where I'm at right now. It's fantastic, I must say. I've never felt better in memory. And
So yeah, it's ridiculous really, isn't it, to think that someone that looks like him and does what he does is concerned about dying of diabetes, when so many people in the modern world now, especially in the West, who look the most opposite to him and are supposedly in the same boat. So there's so much to break down on this video, and again there at the end he's showing a picture again of some fish, and it relates again to diabetes but other health concerns. So with the fish, it's fatty and protein, so if the fat and protein goes up, so your insulin sensitivity comes down. And he already mentioned in the video how it's coming down, but you want it to go up, so he's obviously aware and understands that insulin sensitivity being increased is what you're looking for, and therefore insulin resistance going down. But another health marker you talk about that doesn't even mention, fish that come from the ocean, the lakes, the seas, all of the chemical runoff from animal agriculture, for example, and other business, textile industry, all of these different sources of chemicals being dumped into our waters, the fish will then accumulate all of these toxins in their body through bioaccumulation, and you're eating all of these toxins and poisons. Again, that's another thing, but it's just another thing. But to talk about, we talked about insulin levels. Got fasting versus spikes, insulin spikes. So you don't need to worry about if your insulin goes low and it spikes like that. That's normal. You can't link that to being unhealthy. It's the fasting insulin levels where it goes up and it stays high. So if you have high insulin sensitivity, you get a spike in it. The insulin levels come down because I've done other videos. This video is probably getting on for quite a while now. But if you increase your insulin sensitivity, it means that the insulin receptor site doesn't get blocked by protein and fat. So the affinity for insulin to glucose increases, and the insulin levels, they go up. The glucose goes into the cells because the insulin receptor site it's available for insulin to bind. Glucose goes into the cells, and then you don't have a constantly high insulin level, fasting level, because you're sensitive to insulin. All these things, it all interlinks, doesn't it? And he goes on about how he wants to leave.
It's quite rewarding, actually. I'm still like an absolute
processed
novice,
food still.
but I cooked a steak the other day. I've been helping out in the kitchen more.
It just doesn't make sense, does it? I cooked the steak, and I've already mentioned we know it's not. It's basic stuff. Really, at the end of the day, this whole insulin sensitivity. We know that this is the proportion of ratio of these macronutrients you want in order to increase your insulin sensitivity. So not eating steak is not going to lead to reducing your chances of becoming diabetic. And even if, let's say, you removed all carbohydrates and sugars from your diet, for example, and you just lived on fat and protein, okay? If you do a test called the glucose tolerance test, so you go to your doctors to see if you are diabetic. It's just a very simple test, and they get you to drink some sugar water, essentially, and then after half an hour, let's say 20 minutes, half an hour, they test what is your glucose levels in the blood. You'll fail it, and you'll come out as being diabetic. You'll still come out, the test will show that you are diabetic. As soon as you have sugar, the levels of glucose will go up and stay high. And if you're someone who is eating in this proportion, that doesn't happen. And you just test it yourself. You test it yourself. Your fasting insulin levels come down. You're less anabolic, therefore less weight gain, and that's how you manipulate these in order to lose weight. Insulin is more anabolic than testosterone. If you have high levels of fat and protein, that means your fasting levels of insulin are higher, more often, and therefore your body is more anabolic and you gain weight. If you want to be leaner and not diabetic, this is what you're looking for, and you lose weight. People who go to the gym, if you want to be big, you can go to the gym and take drugs, and I'd never recommend it. People who are seeking every last gain, yeah, you can inject insulin into here, and it makes you more anabolic. And I say that's another video for another day. But I wouldn't recommend it because it can be, if you get it wrong, you can die. If you inject insulin, you can die. Okay. So he goes on about how he wants to be, a good role model for his children and whatnot, and maybe we can think that he's not quite there yet. I don't think he has these worries about being diabetic, but yet doesn't understand that he can't compare himself to normal people because he's not. He's one of the fittest people on the planet. He doesn't need to worry about how much sugar he's getting. He needs to worry about his ratio of fats to protein. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I say I already did a take, which I thought was better. I don't know if I was repeating or missing out things that I needed to say, but I hope this helped. The main point is, if you are someone who's looking to be, the world-class athlete, then you need to have lots of sugars, lots of carbohydrates. You don't need to worry about being diabetic as long as you're keeping the fats and protein low. We know this. This is my conclusion. We know this from the 1936 paper from Harold Percival Hemsworth, stating what insulin sensitivity is. Increasing it, he recommended high carbohydrate diet, low fat, low protein. Cut out animal products because we know so many studies, and we know just from our own personal experience that if you want to perform best for a race, for example, then if you want to come last, get dropped or whatever, smashing a big steak the night before leads to less power, less performance. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I covered all the things that I wanted to. There's so much in this, and I might do other videos. But if you want to check out my channel, like and subscribe. There's other videos where I talk about best performance nutrition for endurance sports. So for me, cycling, how I'm always lean. If you're interested in cycling kit and what you should, it's just come out of the winter now, so we'll be looking to do racing. So I'll be hopefully doing some racing videos, road racing videos, and training, and the weight loss and all these things. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. I think I've covered everything. This video could have been thousands of hours long. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.